Well, hello and welcome everyone once again to CLS Live, a live stream series presented by the publishers of Contact Lens Spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Jedlicka, and as always, it's my privilege to be your host today. Each program, I have the opportunity to chat with leaders in the world of contact lenses, finding out what's going on in the industry from experts in the world of contact lenses. We talk about new and future products, the latest research, worldwide trends in prescribing, and even bring you updates from the floor of contact lens conferences. Today, we're going to continue on our journey through the past, present, and future of contact lenses by talking about the recent history and immediate future of soft contact lenses with perhaps the most prolific researcher and publisher on soft contact lenses, solutions, and care products there is. He is the director of the Center of Ocular Research and Education at the University of Waterloo and a fellow hockey nut, Dr. Lyndon Jones. So Dr. Jones is a professor at the School of Optometry and Vision Science, university professor and director of core at the University of Waterloo. His research interests primarily focus on the interaction of novel and existing contact lens materials with the ocular environment, dry eye, and the development of novel materials for ocular drug delivery. As I mentioned, he has authored over 450 refereed and professional papers, a textbook, given over 1,000 invited lectures at conferences worldwide in over 40 countries. He's recently been made a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, making him only the second optometrist ever to be granted this distinction. So, Dr. Jones, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure. And I was going to ask you about hockey first, but now I need to know who is the first optometrist who got this distinction?
It's Jake Sivak. So Jake Sivak was actually the head of department at the School of Optometry. He recruited me back in 1998. So it's a great honor to be to follow him as a fellow of the Royal Society.
Well, that's awesome. So, so I need to ask you, because we always end up going back to hockey for a variety of reasons, but how is your Stanley Cup bracket challenge going? Are you still in the running, or are you out?
No. I was out a while ago.
Yeah, same here.
It'll be a good fun.
I had a little too high hopes for the Wild this year, and when the Blues took them out in the first round, my brackets were shot. So, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Jones has a son that plays for, again, I believe the Vegas Golden Knights system. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. He was drafted in their first draft back in 2017.
Yeah, and I think did he get to play up in Vegas a little bit this year?
He did. Yeah, he made his NHL debut in he plays for their farm team, the Henderson Silver Knights, that's based in Vegas. So he lives in Vegas. Yeah. And nice. Came up for a couple of games in November. So that was fun. Debbie and I and the family managed to get to see that first game. It's pretty crazy because we can't even skate. We're Brits, as you can tell from our accent. So when we moved here in '98, we'd never even seen a hockey game. So to now have a professional ice hockey player is kind of wild.
Yeah, that is cool. And Vegas is a great place to watch a game, as you probably know. It's very entertaining. So hopefully in the future you have a litany of more opportunities to go back there and watch games. So let's move on to our topic then today, and that is what are we talking about again? Oh yeah, contact lenses. So we're talking about the recent history of soft lenses, and then we're going to dive into more of what's coming in the future. So in the last episode, I got to talk with Nathan Efron, which was quite an honor, about the history of soft lenses. We went back to the beginnings. We talked about a lot of the history through disposability, and we talked a lot about deposits and how disposability has almost eliminated them. And so, but we didn't talk about a lot of other aspects of disposability. And so what other things has disposability brought us in your eyes that we didn't have in the past, other than just deposits, for example?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because deposits actually is how I ended up doing this gig. I was in private practice, and just at the time when high water contact lenses were being introduced into practice back in the sort of mid 80s, before disposability was around. I graduated in 85, so 86, 87 was when those high water contact lenses were coming in. So I was using a lot of them in practice and seeing these huge numbers of deposits, in particular things like lens calculi and nasty films. So that's actually what got me thinking, hey, there's got to be some interaction here between the tear film and these new materials. And just as disposability was coming in, it was, my interest was, how do we know what's the right time or the right length of time for these lenses to be replaced? One of the main things, of course, that I was seeing when I first went into practice with those lenses was GPC. And there's no doubt about the fact that disposability has pretty much eliminated that. If you think about the numbers of lenses that you fit these days, GPC, apart from the mechanical GPC you see with some high modulus materials, you just don't see it. That sort of old immunological GPC just doesn't exist.
Right.
So that's
unless they're wearing their 2-week lenses for 3 months.
Yeah, and you do occasionally get those, but
occasionally.
pretty
you're absolutely right.
We saw reduced vision and reduced comfort with deposits in the past. That's not the case now. With lenses being replaced in such a short period of time, typically 4 weeks or less, we don't see those. Now, interestingly, what we have been looking at is that whole link between deposits and comfort. And you'd think that the more deposits that accumulated on a lens, the less comfortable the lens would be. But actually, that's not the case. If you think about protein, for example, we know that an ionic lens in 2 weeks' time can accumulate something like 1,500 micrograms of protein. A neutral lens in that same length of time would only accumulate 30 micrograms. So 30 versus 1,500, you'd think that the ionic lens would be hugely less comfortable. And that's not the case. So we know that that link is probably more related to not the amount of deposit, but what state it's in. So if you get oxidized lipids, and if you get basically denatured protein, then that's what tends to drive that comfort. So that, still quite a bit of work actually going on around deposits, but really very little link actually between amount of deposit and comfort responses.
And the type of deposits too has more to do than just comfort too. I mean, there's also deposits. The type of deposits can impact the risk of infection, et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct? Or infiltrates, things like that, or
not
so
really?
much?
So certainly not infection. There's been actually no link with amount of deposition and infection at all. Okay. There has been occasionally some papers talking about whether it can drive inflammatory responses. We had some work published a couple of years ago in IVS where we looked at a cell-based model, and we were able to show that the more denatured lysozyme that was there, the greater inflammatory responses we got in a cell-based model. But then when we actually tried to follow that up in a clinical trial, we couldn't correlate that at all. So I think not necessarily what we get in the lab is actually what we see with patients. But still a lot of interest in deposits, but really not so much of a driving factor as it used to be before disposability came. And obviously with daily disposables, you kind of toss it out the
completely gone. So let's talk more about disposability. And one of the, I guess, in my opinion, one of the negatives maybe about having all this disposability is we have less parameters to work with than we did back in the day when lenses lasted a lot longer. And you still can order custom lenses that have all those parameters, but again, you don't have the replacement basis. So do you think that disposability and the simplification of the parameters that are available to us that most of us use on most patients, has that led to an issue with dropouts from bad fits, or do you think that disposable lenses today really are one size fits all?
Well, and again, of course, the companies have done a great job in terms of trying to optimize the lens fit for the vast majority of patients in our practice. And there's a good reason for that. Obviously, it makes it simpler to fit, and certainly the number of SKUs that you end up having to make and therefore store in your practice is fewer as well. But really interestingly, when we looked at the TFOS CLD, the contact lens discomfort reports now several years ago, back in 2013, when we looked at the factors of a contact lens material and design that actually linked to comfort, one of the very, very few things that popped out was actually lens fit. Now, look at all those other things that you think, oh, that's definitely going to drive comfort. But things like modulus, things like oxygen transport, things like edge profile, none of those really have huge amounts of evidence to show that they're in fact linked to comfort. But things like lens fit does. So it is important that we optimize lens fit. Now, of course, typically when you think about fitting, very often you can still see in some textbooks that are even out fairly recently, is you look at, you take K readings and then you fit it based X amount flatter. We know that's not really the way to fit a lens. Actually, sag-based fitting is a much better way of doing that. And some fabulous work that was published a couple of years ago looking at lenses that have exactly the same printed base curve, but the actual sag is really significantly different. So
Right.
some stuff actually that one of the former people who was interviewed on here has been talking about for quite some time. So, oh my goodness me, publishes lots on Pat Caroline. Pat Caroline was one of the first drivers of that concept. So him and Afe van der Vorp has published some work on looking at sag-based fitting being very important. So I think it is very important to remember that you do need to optimize the fit. You know, if a lens doesn't look like it's completely covering the cornea, don't just say it's going to be all right. And of course, that has great implications for one of the other things that I think we are becoming more aware of now, and that's contact lens substitution. You know, I think there are many practitioners out there, and certainly truckloads of patients, even some regulators, that feel that, you know, well, lens A is pretty much the same as lens B, and why shouldn't patients have whatever choice that they want? And if you want to go online and order a different lens, so long as it looks like it's the same prescription and it should fit, that should be okay. Again, a bunch of us, 5 of us actually got together and actually published a very recent paper in Contact Lens and Anterior Eye, looking at the evidence out there around why contact lens substitution can produce issues. And we actually looked at a whole host of effects, and we're able to show quite conclusively that there is a good reason why you need to involve the practitioner if you're going to try a new lens. You can't just, you know, go on the internet, order what you want, and think it's going to work. So contact lens substitution shouldn't occur without the role of the practitioner being involved.
Yeah, I think that evidence to that effect is really needed, because there's certainly a lot of kind of false information being pushed around by those who want to sell lenses that it's not needed. And if we want to change that tide, we've got to have evidence to prove that it is necessary. I completely agree. One of the things,
if you do a search, or if people listen to a search on all contact lenses are not equal, it's a freely downloadable paper from Contact Lens and Anterior Eye. So it's free access, and there's basically tons, like over 100 references that show exactly what you just said.
Perfect. So going back to the whole SAG thing, I think if I can just digress for a second, I think it's pretty easy when you fit a lens on a patient that is too flat or too shallow, if you want to use SAG terms, that most of the time those patients won't like the fit. They'll tell you this is uncomfortable. And so the odds of you sending someone out of your office with a year's supply of loose fitting lenses is pretty low.
Yeah.
But what about the opposite of that?
Yeah.
You know, what about the odds of fitting someone in a lens that's too tight, where their initial comment is, hey, these feel wonderful.
Yep.
And even my first week in them, they feel great. And I get my year's supply, and 6 months later, I go, you know, these aren't as great as I thought they were. And I guess my concern is I see a lot of the newer designs, especially coming out in deeper and deeper sags or tighter fitting lenses. We get these wonderful materials that are we thinking that we've got, for some reason, fitting them tighter is the way to go. I don't know. I'm a little concerned about that. So
yeah, and I think part of the reason, of course, is that exactly as you said, a tighter fitting lens is typically more comfortable than a looser fitting lens. So let's go on the tighter side. Of course, the problem with tight fitting lenses, as we know, is that you end up with a lot more edge-induced staining, depending upon the lens design. But obviously that plays a big role too. But certainly you can increase that. And of course, the other thing is that elimination of waste products from underneath the lens gets reduced as well. So inflammatory responses go up with tighter fitting lenses. So yeah, again, you need that minimum movement. It looks like from all the research that we've seen that probably the best way of judging that is actually not just to do the blink in the primary gaze, but to actually displace the lens and see how quickly it centers. And you want this sort of a nice smooth decentration, as opposed to if you have to do that, it's too tight.
So going back to the basics we learned in school of how to judge a fit, still very relevant, especially with today's lenses. So let's speak about dropouts for just a second, if we can. And we've talked about disposability being a great improvement for our patients, even to the point of dailies. And, you know, when dailies first came out, they weren't the best lenses, but they've gotten so much better. You know, the materials are better, and they have wetting agents now. And gosh, the lenses we have for daily disposables now are pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So why do you talk about this dropout rate of, you know, 1 out of 6, 1 out of 4 patients a year? Why are we still having dropouts? Is it going back to the fit, or what other issues are there?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Jason, because certainly if we look at all of the dropout work that's been done, right, going back to sort of 89, right through to the most recent stuff, dropout rates remain pretty consistent. It's somewhere between 20 and 30%, average of about 25%. So, 1 in 4 patients drop out within a 3 to 5 year time frame. What is interesting about some of the newer work relates to the main reasons why patients drop out from lenses, depending upon whether they're a longer term or existing wearer compared with a newer wearer. And if you look at an existing wearer, the main reason is the one that we always think about, which is dryness and discomfort towards the end of the day, versus a new wearer whose main reasons for dropping out in that particularly the first 3 to 6 months, being handling and vision. And that, I think, is a real lesson for us with new patients to ensure that we follow up to make sure that the patient's getting on well. I think well, they did okay in the practice, we're going to send them off home. In their own environment, patients don't necessarily get on with that handling so well. And when they're in their own environment, maybe the vision's not as good as it should be. So, either getting you or your staff members to follow up fairly quickly within a couple of days to see how they're doing, maybe do a remote consultation. We've got some great remote consultation software these days that we can use where patients can maybe, talk to you about any issues that they've got, maybe demonstrate how they're putting in or taking out the lens. The other thing I think that we're not very good at is often at a progress check, we'll say to a patient, how many hours are you wearing your lenses for? 12, 13, 14. What we don't do is we don't ask the killer follow-up question, which is how many hours are they comfortable for? We're not really interested in total wear time. We're much more interested in comfortable wear time. And again, some beautiful work from Robin Chalmers and others have shown that if that gap between total wear time and comfortable wear time is about 2 hours or more, that patient stands a greater chance of dropping out. So if there is that 2 hours or more difference, we need to step in and do something. Maybe that's a change in material, a change in care system, a change in frequency of replacement, but we've got to do something. The other thing I think we're not very good at doing is necessarily when patients come into to practice is offering them something new. We'll say to them, hey, how are you getting on with your lens? Oh, fine. Beautiful 4-letter F word. Fine's not good enough. Patients should do better than fine. And if they're only fine, then why not offer them something new? Because again, what I tend to find, and certainly I did when I was in practice, was the patients don't know how comfortable their lenses can be until maybe they have something to compare it with. And we know that change is the constant. We know that across the lifetime of wear of a patient, we shouldn't expect the fact that the lens that we fit a patient with today will still be the same one that will suit their lifestyle or their ocular surface over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think offering them the next greatest thing when they come into practice is a great thing. A, because patients do get a comparison, but B, because it makes them want to keep coming back to see you. Because every time I go to see Dr. So-and-so, hey, he tries me with something that's new. I want to do that. So
yeah. So it sounds like in a lot of ways, the whole concept of dropouts, a lot of them could be avoided if practitioners were a little bit more proactive in optimizing the fit and the material and following up with their patients and making sure that they're functioning with their lenses the way they should. So it still goes back to the fact that at the end of the day, even as we make these great materials, we still have work to do as practitioners. We have to do our part of it in keeping our patients in lenses. So
we do indeed. Yeah. And you can have a great product that just doesn't work on every patient. We know that. If it was, there would only be one material out there. And we don't understand that biology of the eye. We don't understand why patient A gets on so much better with one lens material than another. There's a lot of work going on trying to understand that, because how great would it be if you could do, these 3 simple tests and it spurts out this, hey, you need this material for this reason with this frequency replacement. Not there yet, but lots of people are looking at that. It would be fabulous for us as clinicians to know that.
Well, there's a couple more things I want to cover before we wrap up here. But first thing is I want to look to the future a little bit. And again, you do a lot of work with materials in particular. Look to 10 years down the road here. Are there materials in development? Are there, and I don't mean like the fancy high tech stuff, I'm talking about the stuff that most practitioners will prescribe someday. Is there new stuff coming and what is it? I mean, what's the future of the next 10-ish years for regular soft lenses?
Well, I mean, the great thing is that companies are still constantly innovating. I mean, they've not sat back on their laurels and gone, hey, you know what? Our market share is pretty good at the moment, and these lenses are good. They are constantly looking at trying to improve the products that they're bringing to the market. So that's great. I mentioned already the biology of the eye. One of the things we know is that over the course of a day, for the vast majority of people, there is this drop off in comfort. Now, is that something that's happening to the lens, or is it something that's happening to the biology of your eye? A beautiful experiment that Eric Pappas did years ago now was to, middle of the day, take the lens out, put a brand new lens in, and track what comfort does. And he was able to show that even if you replace the lens halfway through the day, 2/3 of the way through the day, where the patient ends up with comfort is pretty much about the same. So it's probably the eye that's the problem. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we know is that if you track comfort over the course of a day without a lens in place, and then the next day you put in, name your product, doesn't really matter, and you track comfort, it's always lower, like always. There are some patients for whom it's only a little bit lower, but something is going on. And so probably the biggest innovation, the biggest thing that people are trying to look at now is trying to produce contact lens materials that look more like the palpebral conjunctiva and the cornea. If you can produce lens materials that look like that, and there is the minimal interaction possible between the surface of the eye, the undersurface of the lid, and that lens material that you put in, and it really is truly biomimetic, so it looks like the cornea and conjunctiva, I think we're going to stand a better chance. So in order to do that, some people look at new materials. Some people are looking at trying to recharge the lens surface. If you've got a reusable lens and you put it into a solution overnight, how about there's something in that solution that can recharge that surface and supercharge the surface such that the next morning it looks like a brand new lens. A lot of work going on that at the moment. And the other thing that we've also got better at is understanding that no matter how good your lens and material is, if your ocular surface isn't superb, that product ain't going to work. So we need to pay more attention to ensuring that the ocular surface is pristine and doing as we would do with a dry eye checkup, making sure that the meibomian glands and the lids and the lid margins are all super, super good. So again, some great work looking at things like Demodex. We tend to think of Demodex producing dry eye in a patient. Some beautiful work to show that a lot of patients who are contact lens dropouts actually have minor blepharitis or an overabundance of Demodex. So clean up that ocular surface, regardless of who the patient is, and that super duper lens material is going to stand a better chance of success.
So this whole concept of water gradient technology may be just the beginning of the future of trying to create lenses that have a surface to them, again, which tries to differentiate from the core of the lens. The core material versus the surface of the lens may have a different characteristic, where the surface of the lens is more ocular surface like.
Yeah, and again, you can take that to the full extreme, whereby why would you imagine that the best properties for the back surface of the lens is the same as the best properties for a front surface of a lens? Sure. Why can't you develop a lens material that actually has differential surfaces? Now that's it's going to be difficult for the patient to put it in the right way, but if they do, that would be cool. But again, there's lots of work in trying to optimize both of those, along with optimizing the fit and the edge form as well, because the edge form is also critical for how that lid interacts with it.
Yeah. Well, so we need to wrap up here pretty quick. And I was going to give you the chance at the end to just kind of have a little time to talk about anything, but I have actually a specific thing I'd like you to talk about, because it's come up through this. And I think as we talked beforehand, and even as this talk has gone on, maybe a lot of practitioners don't know where to go to read all this research, to read all this information that we're talking about that's so critical if we're going to minimize dropouts and if we're going to take the best care of our patients. So can you just say, other than Spectrum, which is a great resource for clinical contact lens care, but what are some other publications out there that will talk more to the research side that we should all be more aware of and reading?
Yeah, and I think what's tending to happen these days, and some of it I think has been driven by the pandemic, because people were so comfortable with doing webinar type and doing online education. There's a lot more educational resources these days that are online. The old traditional way of going to a journal and reading a journal. What we need basically some online magazines like Spectrum, like Review. We've got a thing that Core does Core puts out 6 times a year, called contactlensupdate.com, which is, again, freely accessible. You can go to that basically in terms of, and what we try to do is we try to take the most recent research and disseminate it in a very simplistic way. So this is, here's the research, high level, scientifically relevant paper, but this is the take home message for you. And I think there are many, many opportunities now for those kind of platforms to do that. And I think, so long as they're evidence-based, there are some websites, of course, you go to and go, I'm not quite sure about the message there. But if it's generic education that is evidence-based, then that's what we need. And I think things like Contact Lens Spectrum, these kind of opportunities to get information out quickly, easily disseminated is really important. Because ultimately what we want to do is, if we want the industry to keep producing these great products, we've got to fit more lenses.
Right.
And I think, we're not very good at trying to persuade spectacle wearers to wear lenses. It was really interesting when I was in practice. We just refit the practice. We just bought it and it was like, we need to get more contact lens wearers. So we set up this little concept of, okay, for the next 100 people come in, what we'll do is we'll sit here and wait and see if they want contact lenses. The next 100, we went, you know what? Everyone's going to be offered a free trial. If you go ahead, you're going to have to go and pay full fees. And through that proactive approach to fitting the products, we fit 6 times more lenses.
Yeah.
So, companies were happy, patients were happy, we were happy. But again, there's no point in the companies producing these great products if we as the gatekeepers are not going to fit them.
Yeah, and we know that contact lens wearers are more profitable to our practice. So it's in our best interest to have our patients in contact lenses. They get more frequent exams, they purchase more product, et cetera. So you said contactlensupdate.com.
Yes. Yep. So it's
Okay.
It's on the core website, contactlensupdate.com. It comes out 6 times a year, and very, very kindly supported by 3 companies. So thank you to them for supporting us. And it's generic.
I'm ashamed to say I'm not subscribed to it, but I will right now. So, so anyway, this has been great. Like always, I feel like we could go another half hour easily because I have a million questions for you, but time is drawn near. Before we part, I got to get your pick. Who are you going with, the Avalanche or the Lightning in the finals?
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it? I think a lot of it's, there's 2 players who, if they come back, will make a difference. So Kadri coming back for the Avs and Braden Point coming back for Tampa. Vasilevsky he's a tough guy to beat. I think I'm going to have to go with Tampa. And if they do win it, of course, it'll be the first time in 40 years. 1983 was the last time anyone won 3 times in a row, the Islanders. So I'm going to go with Tampa.
Yeah, I think. Well, so I feel like the Avalanche are a steamroller this year, but if anyone can do it, it's Tampa, just because they've been there and they have the experience and they've been in this spot before. So I think it should be a great series. I don't think the Lightning are going down in 4 like everyone else has been for Colorado. So anyway, well, thanks again for being here today, and for truly a pleasure for me to get to talk to you as always. Just a reminder to everyone else to look for our prior episodes of CLS Live on the Contact Lens Spectrum page on Facebook or on clspectrum.com, as well as now the transcripts of the show are appearing in the printed version of Spectrum each month. So look for that. And then again, join me next month for our July episode of CLS Live, where we will wrap up our series on the past, present, and future of contact lenses with a futuristic look at contact lenses with Dr. Joe Barr. Thank you all again and have a great day.